Alright, so my name is Blain Snipstal. I'm a returning generation farmer, seed saver, peasant based out of Baltimore, Maryland, 35 minutes north of Maryland. North of Baltimore City in Maryland, Sparks, Maryland. I work for a farm called Five Seeds Farm. We are one of the only black family farms in the state left, and one of the few young farms of black farmers. My farming partner, Denzel Mitchell, is 38 years old. His birthday was a couple of days ago, and I myself are 24 years old. I've been farming for 5 years now, since I was 18 going on 19, and I was raised by my grandmother, who always had a pro-black mentality as she raised me. So I had a sense of social justice, or a sense of cultural pride within me, although yet I hadn't begun to understand it, 5 years ago. However, I needed an internship, and a good friend of mine's father is from Ethiopia, and I thought to pair up with him for a good experience. And he was running a small nursery. He was a soil scientist as well, so he had a composting operation in Northern California in Davis. And so I started interning with him, and I absolutely hated it. I didn't like a single minute of what I was doing. I'd always been outside in terms of my work, but I didn't like this work. It was too mentally intensive, too labor intensive. I was always sweating, and we would get into a lot of dialogue, or arguments, better yet, about the purpose of work, and the level of mental presence one has to have in maintaining this purpose of work. By the end of this internship, I was in love with agriculture and in love with them working outside in this manner. And since then, once I discovered I was in agriculture, I decided to stay in agriculture. And as my process has evolved over time, my understanding of the power dynamics, social relations, and inequalities as they interweave through agriculture and our food systems, and really our social structure as a society, has kept me even more involved and brought me to Via Campesina, who I've been a part of since 2010. Via Campesina was formed formally in 1993 in Homs, Belgium, at a meeting of all the campesino, or the peasant and farmer organizations of the world, met after a period of the restructuring of many global south economies by the IMF and the burgeon of the WTO at the dawn of the 1990s. So predating 1993, there were what's called now farmer exchange visits. So farmers from Canada would go down to Peru, farmers from West Africa would go to Brazil, so on and so forth. And they initiated this movement as a global response to, like I had mentioned, the process of restructuring put forth by the financial institutions, but also to engage in the dialogue around food, hunger, and poverty at the international level. The peasant voice, the farmer's voice, was absent predating this occurrence. So in 1993, Via Campesina was formally formed. They returned to the global stage in 1996 at the World Food Summit in Rome to launch this concept of food sovereignty. This was the first time a concept was able to transcend food security in its bounds and its articulations around power. And many of us use this definition today. In 1999 was the inaugural battle against the WTO that took place in Seattle, and in 2001 again in Cancun, Mexico. And that was one of the first major aberrations of Via Campesina at the international level, taking presence against the mercantilization, commodification, and the overall capitalization of agriculture, and the influence that international institutions and subservient national governments have had on agriculture and small-scale producers, particularly in the rural sector, but also around the world and in urban spaces. Today, Via Campesina is a movement of movements of roughly 300 million peasants, Afro-Indigenous, indigenous, farmers, fisher folks, people of the forest, the landed and the landless, women and youth from over 70 countries on all. So when we talk about food sovereignty within the context of the U.S., we have to start from a place of history. but not history as in something that's behind us, but something that's living. We're living history. The past isn't something you read in a book, as James Baldwin said. It's something that you're writing in the present. And so in 1920, which a lot of literature will suggest was one of the pinnacles of the pinnacle decades of agriculture in the United States, was a particular moment of prosperity in relation to the trajectory of Afro-descendants, Afro-Indigenous, African-American black farmers and landowners in the continental U.S. post the destruction of Reconstruction. We have to realize Reconstruction never happened in its truest form because it was essentially built upon land redistribution, but that was thwarted 3 years after it was suggested. So in 1920, African Americans owned roughly 18 to 23 million acres in the continental U.S. We had roughly 750, 820,000 farmers at that time. And the majority of our population was still condensed in the southeastern United States. However, after 1920, there were some major historical milestones that quickly shifted the demographic of land ownership and completely already exacerbated racialized context of land ownership in the continental U.S. By 1930, at really the height of the Great Depression, we begin to see the dispossession of African American lands really being heightened more so than it had in the previous decade. Partly this was the falling out of the cotton, corn, wheat, and commodity industries. Partly it was the rise of industrial jobs, the continuing rise of industrial jobs in the North, but also too it was the rampant racism in the South. The social conditions were intolerable at best. Structures of tenant farming, sharecropping, pseudo-slave-like conditions, utter poverty were far more than any literature can suggest at that time. So all those kind of brought a confluence of a mass exodus of black landowners, out of their land ownership and to the North, mainly for capital to survive, because there were no support mechanisms at that time. So fast forward to the intermediary period between World War II, you see that white farmers lost 100,000 farmers in that time. Meanwhile, African Americans lost a very similar number. However, 100,000 of a declining population resulted in 56% of our population essentially gone in a 4-year period in terms of land ownership. I can be reached at Blain Snipstal at gmail.com, BLAIN.Snipstal, SNIPSTAL at gmail.com. My farm's email address is 5seedsfarm.com, 5FIVE seeds SEEDS farm FARM.com. And I would like to extend many thanks to Brother Malik, Red, Black, and Green for this opportunity to share information that I didn't necessarily create myself, but just to add to the dialogue as we further engage ourselves around this conversation of food sovereignty and autonomy.